How's there any way that this works out? Credit score is under 600, property owned by a corporation. All of them have problems. They all have problems. Jeff, you want to take it away here?
There's not really much to say.
We had 11 investors in this. Nick, I asked you last time, so I'm going to ask you again. Just looking at the screen, one glance, you got like 3 seconds to scan the screen right now. Would you fund this borrower? Yes or no?
I'm open to hearing more. I can't give you.
Are you open to hearing more because of last time?
Yes.
Okay. It's good that you're open to hearing more. This one, I'm starting to really enjoy these. They take obviously a long time to create in terms of going through them and looking back. It's so good for us though, like looking back at a deal that we did and looking at how it started and where we went to, and then being able to tell the story. And I think, as we keep doing these, they're gonna get better and better. But this one specifically, I think all of these are gonna start this way, and I think it's so powerful to look at these bullets that are on the first slide and just kind of look at how messy and how chaotic it looks. And the three things that I want to focus on with this one right off the hop, before we even get into the debts or, the financial situation of the borrower, is first and foremost, this was a requested loan over $1 million. And this is right away, it's a higher payment risk. And if you don't know what payment is the risk that someone won't pay. Right. And when you have a small loan and accordingly a small payment, the payment risk the risk that someone may pay may be the same, but the consequence of someone not paying is very different. And when you have a loan request, immediately when I see a loan request over $1 million, the first thing I think about is, even if this loan gets priced at our lowest pricing, which would be 6.5% interest, this is still going to be a monthly interest payment of about $5,500. And if it gets priced at the higher end of our pricing scale, it could be as much as $9,000 a month in interest only. So why that's important right off the hop, and why it scares a lot of lenders away before they even dig into it and find out if there's an opportunity there, is because if this borrower stops paying, then that loan amount, or what it takes to get our money back, goes up by $5,500 to $9,000 a month, right? So your 1.28 turns into 1.29 pretty quick, and then turns into 1.3, and so on. And it takes time to go through the enforcement process. So we always kind of think about worst case scenario. And so I immediately see 1.28 million, and I'm like, elevated payment risk right off the hop. And it does scare some lenders away entirely before you even get started. It's kind of like how people react in this market, where I see this all the time. It's like, it's a condo. I don't do condos. Why not? Well, I read an article, condos are bad. And people run instead of digging in. But there's a lot of really good condo deals out there right now, because people bought condos and values like pre-construction condos, and people and the value has dropped, and so people are stuck. Well, when they're stuck, they need private loans. So it's not about looking at something on the surface and being afraid. It's about finding out whether or not the problems are fixable. And you've heard me say that before. The second thing here is self-employed borrowers. So you got a loan amount of $1.28 million that's being requested, and you've got a borrower with income that's very difficult to verify. And so you've got income risk. It's elevated right off the hop. It's all I need to see. I don't even have to see the details yet, and I know we've got elevated income risk. We're gonna have to dig in on that. Then this one is a really unique piece too, in that its ownership is a corporation. So we have to then figure out, we have title risk. We got to figure out who are the humans behind the corporation, and how many are there, and are they all on side, and so on and so forth. So right off the hop, I see three things here, and there's more on the screen, obviously, that needs more explanation. But right off the hop, you'll have lenders that will look at this and will run away just because the loan amount's too big, self-employed income, corporate ownership structure, and that's the end. So the question you have to ask yourself here is, do you dig in or do you run away? And here's what we know about private mortgages. All of them have problems. You hear me say this all the time. They all have problems. So the question isn't whether or not you can find one that doesn't have problems. The ones that do have problems, we eliminate like 8 out of 10 of them, right? So we decline 8 out of 10 of the problem files. We're actually, what we're doing is sifting through them, looking for um, solvable problems. And the question then becomes, is it worth it to put your time into digging in? And so, what we've done in 3 minutes, we could easily just run away from this. But what if we put another 15 or 20 minutes into it? What would we find out? That's the question. And it's amazing how often I talk to other private lenders who just run away from deals like this. Like I said, the condo example, just eliminate all condos. It doesn't make any sense. Or, I don't want to lend in this particular city. That doesn't really make sense. It's not that's emotional based decision making. It's a preference as opposed to looking at it like a science and saying, well, if it checks all the boxes, I'll lend wherever, right? And so we're looking for deals we can solve a problem for. And if you want to put a value on it, you look at it and go, $1,300,000 loan. Let's just say, for easy numbers for everybody who's watching, 10% yield. That's $130,000 of potential wealth that you can gain if you do fund this loan. So the question to you would be, is it worth half an hour to see whether it's an opportunity to lend and whether you could solve the problems and create a safe loan? So my answer on the surface is always yes. So you can show me the messiest slide one. All of these episodes we do, the slide one, I'll always tell you, yes, we went a little deeper, because otherwise we're going to miss those 2 out of 10. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go to slide 2. So I already have my spidey senses up, right? Corporate borrower, self-employed, large loan amount. Now let's look at the debt picture. Let's look at the math, right? The financial picture. And guess what? It gets worse, right? So we start with those 3 main risk factors, and then we dive into this. And here's what we see: $60,000 in consumer debt alongside 3 mortgages across 2 properties that combined are $3.15 million. And collectively, this borrower is on the hook for over $23,000 a month just to service the mortgages. So if you were scared by slide 1, you would get to slide 2, look at this, and a lot more people run away. Would you agree?
Definitely.
There's
Absolutely.
got to be a part of you, I'm guessing, that looks at this already and is like, how is there any way that this works out? Like, that there's a structure that could actually work here, given all of these risk factors we've already looked at. And that is where the magic is can you look past this, acknowledging that, hey, yes, there are some issues here, and still put a few more minutes into seeing whether or not there's a structure. So let's look at it all together. Go to the next slide. Here's what we're looking at. Now we're not looking at a bunch of bullets scattered all over the page. We actually organize the material. And here's what you've got. You've got a $1.28 million request. It's at the highest end of our risk scale, meaning they're asking for the maximum we would lend. It's 80% of the value of the house. You've got stated income of only $150,000. So, I mean, it doesn't take a mathematician to look at that and go, how does a guy making $150,000 afford a mortgage of 1.28 million plus the other mortgage on the other property? He's got 23,000 a month. Just do easy math. What's 23,000 a month is double the $150,000 income just to pay the mortgages, right? So you look at this, credit score is under 600, ownership structure, property owned by a corporation. I mean, there's where do you go from here? Well, I'll tell you where we go from here. The first thing we do is verify everything. We got to look at whether or not we have the details right, because the applications come in, they're a lot of times ballpark figures and whatnot. When we're looking at this, if I want to minimize the amount of time I put into this in case it's one of the 8 out of 10 I'm going to decline, I want to make sure at least I make the broker and the borrower do the work of getting me accurate information so I can actually look at whether or not there's something that we can do here. So, this is exactly what we did. Go to the next slide. So we looked at first and foremost the borrower. Okay. It's a corporate borrower with a personal guarantee. So are we able to identify the human and verify that they are the owner of the property through the corporation? We were able to do that. The property was owned by a numbered company. Corporate records confirm the guarantor and that they were the sole director and shareholder. So we're in good shape there. Then we're able to look at the income reality. Now, income is funny because a stated income self-employed borrower, you already know that what they're stating is an income that is protective of income taxes. So what they've done is they've made a conscious decision. This is the assumption. They've made a conscious decision that instead of paying 50% tax on their income, they'll shelter some of that income and pay less tax, and they know the consequences. They won't qualify for what they need to borrow from a bank to get a mortgage, so they'll have to go into private and they'll pay the premium. And what they've done is they've done the math and said, I'll save more in taxes than I'll pay in interest on my mortgage. So we can look at that number and say it's feasible, it's conceivable, sorry, that this person is actually making more money than it looks like they're making on paper. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How do you trust whatever amount they tell you?
Well, two things. Number one, you can ask for bank statements to show actual money going into actual bank accounts. But in today's world, you might agree, people make money in all different ways, right? It's not like it was, say, when my father was in his money making years and everybody worked for the same company for 30 years and got a watch and a retirement party and all the rest of it. It's not like that. We're a very transient workforce now, and people make money on the side and so on. So a lot of times, Nick, it can be as simple as, okay, show me something, show me some evidence to say that you're not biting off more than you can chew. And rely on the broker, who's the representative of the borrower, to provide that kind of evidence. And it can be a lot of different things. What's nice about private is that it's private. We make the rules and we decide what reasonable is and so on. And there's also an understanding there, like, if we were to lend you this money and you were telling us you made X, but you really aren't making X, then you're taking a pretty big risk, because if you can't make the payments, everybody knows what's going to happen. So the answer to your question is a circular answer. It's not black and white. But what we try to do is use common sense and try to find a way to verify. From our perspective, it's an ethical verification where we want to make sure, to the best of our ability, that the borrower isn't biting off more than they can chew. There are other mechanisms that we can use if we're not sure. We could build in an interest reserve so we could pay some of the interest with part of the loan. So we hold it back. I say, well, you can only show us $150,000 worth of income, so we're not going to put you in a mortgage that's $23,000 a month, right? We're going to put you in one where we've held back half of that, and you're only responsible for $10,000 a month or something. I know those numbers don't work, but you get the idea. Okay. So the point is, verify everything before we start structuring. Now, we can do this in a very short period of time, and there's a cost to doing business to being a private lender. So unless you're an administrator, um, if you're an individual, you're going to be looking at applications, you're going to be doing some verification, you're going to put half an hour into one of these, and knowing 8 out of 10 of them are going to be declined. So let's say it takes an hour. So you put 10 hours into looking at 10 applications, you end up with 2 deals. Your hourly rate's still pretty good if your money gets out and it gets out safely. But a lot of private lenders don't. A lot of private lenders look at the application, those first 2 slides that we looked at, which were pretty messy. They see all these red flags and they bail. and they missed the 2 out of 10 that are pretty good deals. And you'll see at the end of this one that obviously it works out pretty well. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's where the digging produces the diamond. So you start digging, you're looking at everything, you're verifying everything. And in the course of the conversation with the broker, you end up having a conversation about the things that matter the most to us. Number one, first and foremost, if we get everything wrong, like if all of our assessments, our evaluations, everything is wrong, is the property, the collateral, strong enough to still get us out, get our money back? And you're going to look at an appraisal, you might look at an opinion of value from a realtor and so on and so forth. And in this case, one of the things that we noticed when looking at the appraisal for this property was that the land value alone was 1.12 million. If you remember, the loan request was 1.23. So you're looking at like in the high 90 percentile of that value or that loan is land value alone. Makes you feel very secure because you're not really counting on the house to bring too much value. The land alone is worth over $1 million. So you feel pretty good there. That's one piece. If you feel good about the collateral, then the next question you want to ask, and it's not just the investor that needs to ask, the borrower should too, so should the broker, is if we access the equity that's available within our guidelines. So if let's say you're wanting to borrow 1.23 million because that's 80% of the appraised value, but you got to pay off a first mortgage, you got to pay off a second mortgage that you already have and so on. Is there enough equity to make a difference to change your circumstances? Because if there isn't, we're not doing anything except incurring fees and eroding equity. So that's number two. But if you check that box, if you look at it and you go, if everybody involved can say, yeah, you know what? If we take this $100,000 of equity out of the property and we use it to pay those $60,000 of debts and service fees and so on and so forth, the credit will improve. And then the broker goes, yeah, you know what? Then it would look like a picture I could take to a bank and I could refinance them back to a bank in 12, maybe 18, maybe even 24 months. Okay, now you have something. And the last piece from the borrower's perspective is, okay, well, can they get there? Like, can they sustain the payments for long enough to get to the solution? So if we've determined that, okay, if we get all this wrong, we've devised a plan. We think if the borrower does X, Y, and Z, if they do these things, there's a viable plan to get to a refinance back to a bank. That's always your assumption, that they're going to refinance back to a bank. And if we get it wrong, the collateral's strong enough to bail us out. And it appears like there's a plan in place where the borrower can afford these payments, and it's going to take 12 to 18 months, but they can do that for that long. And you have a solid exit. Well, then now you're onto something. Now the deal has legs. So now you start to hone in on the structure. And during that conversation, I remember this, we find out, oh, the borrower's not looking to refinance at all. They want to sell the property. They feel like they're over leveraged, but they want to sell the property under no duress. They don't want to be in power of sale with one of their mortgages. Like, they can feel it slipping away. So they want to sell one, keep the other, and steady the ship. Well, that changes everything. So now we're looking at, I don't need a plan that will fix the credit. I don't need a plan that'll pay off all the debts, because the sale will pay off all the debts. And I probably don't need a second year, because I think you'd agree, if you price the properly, if you list the property for the right price, a year should be enough to get any property sold. If you're selling at the right price, if you don't have some, ridiculous expectations. So all of a sudden, this is a game changer. Now, if you gave up at the beginning, right, because you saw a corporate borrower, because self-employed income, because the loan amount was 1.23 million requested, you never found this out. You never considered that this was a potential opportunity. If you gave up, if you got past that, but then you gave up because you saw, oh my gosh, they own 2 properties, they have 3 mortgages across the 2 properties, $3.15 million in mortgage debt, $23,000 a month. Oh my gosh, forget it. Never even looked this, never had the conversation. You missed the opportunity there too. So here we find these two really key pieces of information, and they are the seeds to the actual solutions. Let's go to the next slide.
This is actually what's giving me the most fuzzy, secure feeling. The fact that they're wanting to avoid power of sale. So that means they're hell bent on avoiding enforcement.
And you don't find that out until you're willing to have the conversation and actually look for the solution, right? You're actually trying to help. It's like, this is probably a bad analogy, but like people come into a hospital that are sick all the time, and it's not within the power of the doctors to save everybody. But if the doctors don't even look, if they just write people off, because of the symptoms they're presenting, a lot more people die. You know what I mean? So, okay, so we find out these two pieces of information, right? So, okay, land value 1.12. If you go back, actually, Nick, can you go back a few slides to slide number 2? Okay, see the primary property in the middle. You see the existing first mortgage is 900,000, existing second is 250. So the ask was 1.23, so we could pay out both of those. Okay, and pay out both of those, service the fees and whatnot. But it wasn't really a strong proposal because it wasn't enough to deal with the consumer debt. At that time, that's what we thought we needed to. Now, granted, the broker already knew they were going to try to sell one property, but they didn't tell us that at first. So our underwriting brains went to, well, what's the point of paying out these 2 mortgages if you can't deal with the debt? You're never going to be able to refinance back to a bank. And we weren't even thinking the right way because we didn't have all the information. So now we get all the information and we're like, well, wait a minute. It's only the first mortgage that's at maturity and wanting to be paid out, not both. And the second mortgage has already agreed to be in second position. And the worst thing that could happen for the second mortgage in this position is that the first mortgage goes into power of sale, because that puts them at more risk because they don't control the sale process and they don't get paid first. The first mortgage gets all its money before that second mortgage gets any of his. So we know this. So now we start thinking, well, the second mortgage, it's in their best interest that we steady that first mortgage and make it so that there's no risk of power of sale. So what we proposed was, I don't want to lend you 1.23. I'd be much more comfortable at the land value. Go to the next slide. Sorry, go back one. Yeah. I would be much more comfortable at 1.12 because that's land value and it's only 70% instead of 80% of the value. And because we don't need to refinance it, we don't need to pay out the debts, we don't need to do any of that. We just need to steady the ship for a year to let them sell under no duress. Remember the impact of them listing the property for sale and it saying it's under power of sale. That'll change the whole marketing strategy. It'll change what it attracts in terms of offers. So we go back to them and we say, listen, how about we lend you 1.12, and that'll be enough to do 2 things: pay out the first mortgage, give you a little bit of money to make sure the property is in its best shape, it looks as its best version of itself, so you can sell it for top dollar under no duress. And all that has to happen is we need the second mortgage to postpone. So they need to just agree to allow us to come in, take out the existing first mortgage, and away we go. And they agreed.
It's just peaceful runway and then peaceful exit into the sunset.
Yeah, because now the second mortgage says, okay, so I'll sit and wait for the property to sell. I'll keep getting my payments. We reduce the payment, the request from 1.28 down to 1.12, takes the payment down from 10,000 to 8,800. So what we did is we built in a reserve. I can't remember how much, but we built in a reserve so that we could make the payments cheaper for the borrower. Might have even been 100%. So they can focus on one thing: list, market, sell.
Yeah, so you mentioned having refinance in your back pocket in an earlier slide, but since
Yeah.
that's not the focus here, and
Hmm.
we're both aligned on selling, are you still kind of structuring that in? Are you still incentivizing the borrower to be refinanceable, or you're just, we're extending the
Great
runway,
question.
smooth exit? Yeah.
No, when someone says the exit strategy is to sell, then what we do is we take away options for extensions and renewals. So we basically tell them, okay, we're going to give you 1 year and we're going to hold you to it. So you have a year, that's plenty of time, because you do have to safeguard against this one scenario, which is you get an offer, it's enough to pay the mortgage off, but it's not what the borrower wanted to put money in their pocket. And so they don't accept. And so we have to tell them at the front, at the very beginning, look, you get a year. And if you don't sell, the market's going to tell you what the house is worth. And if you decide not to accept, we can't force you to accept an offer. But if you don't, then you do have to pay the mortgage off in a year. So that whether that means going to another private lender or whatnot, you don't have a choice.
Can you ask them to list by month 9, let's say, so you get that exposure to market by month 12, and then you have kind of more like a tighter grip on when
Yeah, you
on what they can accept?
you can ask. It's just the challenge is enforcing it. You
Yeah.
know,
Okay.
it's hard to enforce. So, okay. So, yeah, let's take a look now at how it performed. I mean, you couldn't have asked for better. Jeff, you want to take it away here?
There's not
Really
really much to say.
complicated.
Like it was a perfect loan all throughout, right? So every month was paid on time. Every investor got their payment on the 15th of every month. It was a flawless loan. The duration was little over 7 months, right around 7 months, nine and a
Mhm.
half percent interest.
We
There's
did
not
have
much to say
the
here.
we did have one NSF in April.
Yep.
It was I know it was corrected really quickly, and then the final payment was returned NSF. But that's typical, where people know that the closing date is coming, and so they basically think they don't need to pay the last payment on the first of the month previous to the closing, because it's just going to get lumped into um, the closing, which it did. So I mean, it's an NSF, but it's not a real true NSF, because you already know the property's sold and it's going to be paid out from the proceeds. So, but yeah, in terms of performance, you couldn't ask for better. But what's amazing here, right, is you look at like like this is not what you would expect from the first slide. And this is the idea, that this is the reason we're making these videos, right, is to show people how calm it actually can be when you do the right digging, the right structuring, and so on. Let's take a look at the next slide.
Was there a
I'll,
prepayment penalty?
I think we gave them a reduction. Like we made a concession to say, like, this was a sale, so you knew it was going to be a sale, and so you don't want to charge somebody, like put a a barrier up, right, to get out. So we would have probably reduced this to 1 month.
Okay.
And the reason is you have a penalty in there because the 1 month gives us some runway to find the investor a new opportunity when they get paid out early, right? Because they're expecting 12 months. That's what was committed to them. So that's how that works. Okay. So the outcome, again, just a different way to look at it, but from a more specific investor perspective. We had 11 investors in this mortgage, and you can see, and the reason we put this up there is just to see, like, some big ones, some small ones. Like investors of all shapes and sizes can participate in a syndicate. And so to get a million, 1.2, we had 11 investors ranging from, I guess the lowest one there is 31.5 and the biggest one is 221,500. You can see the investors' interest amounts, like how much they earned relative to their size, but they're all earning a 9.5% annualized return. Everybody got 100% of their principal back. Total interest on the million 1.2 is $58,155.63. The most boring investment you'll ever have, and it's exactly what we try to produce. And this is such a great example of that. And there's just so many of these. Like this is not abnormal. This is the norm. So, what do we learn from a deal like this? Well, first and foremost, um, you shouldn't really evaluate risk based on borrower circumstances. That would be the biggest lesson here. Is it's not borrower circumstances; it's solvable problems and what kind of structure you can put in place, gathering all the information. And then once you have all the information, being able to look at what makes sense. On the surface, you would think, why would we ever do a deal like this where we're leaving $60,000 of consumer debt on the table? But you don't always have to pay out all the debt to create the exit. And there's no good reason to take on unsecured debt and turn it into secured debt if you don't need to. So we left all 60,000 alone. The corporate structure, not really a problem as long as we can verify that the human behind the corporation is on title and is guaranteeing the loan, then it's not such a big deal. So you look at the little details here that played a big role. Land value of the appraisal giving us a really good place to start from in terms of what we want or what we're comfortable offering. And then the difference between what the borrower wanted and what they actually needed. What they wanted was 1.28, what they got and what they needed 1.12, and it was enough to support a great exit. Why lend more than you need? In fact, from a borrower's perspective, why borrow more at these rates, right? Why borrow more than you need? But sometimes, the application comes in and the application is centered on what's comfortable, right? I want to clean it all up. That's the mentality. That's what would feel better for the borrower. But our job is to sift through that and trim it back, right? Trim, trim, trim. Wait, you don't need to do that. Sometimes Jeff's seen this many times where, someone wants to clean up all their debt. And we say, well, wait a minute, you get the same impact on your credit score if you just pay the debts down to 25% of their limit. So why pay it all off? We don't need to take a bigger loan. From our perspective, we don't need to give a bigger loan. We need to give you what you need, and then you have to do the right things. In this case, they did. They took the money, they listed the property, they sold it in 7 months. Everybody wins. So the real lesson, right? We don't approve deals based on appearances, right? We approve them based on what's solvable. What structure makes the most sense, the strength of the collateral, and of course, the exit plan that makes the most sense, and it has to be viable. The difference between a private lender and a borrower is emotion. So borrowers, when they come, they're emotional. That's why it's difficult sometimes for them to sell at the price that the market is giving them, even when that amount is enough to pay off all the debt and still walk away with some money in their pocket. Um, the reason why they ask for more than they need, again, emotion, right? So our job is to take the emotion out, look at the math, look at look at what's realistic. If you ask a borrower, how are you going to pay this back in a year, almost to a person, they'll say, I have a plan, don't worry, I got it, because it seems like forever, a year, and a year goes by so fast. And you would be surprised, I think, at how many times we get 9 months down the road and the borrower's completely forgotten what they told us they were going to do. So we have to hold them accountable. We have to remind them. And we don't remind them at the last minute. We remind them with months to go. So there's still time to execute the exit strategy. But things change very quickly in people's worlds. And when they're applying, they're under pressure, right? So there's some pressure, right? You know, they're when you come to private, you're facing, I got declined at the bank and the only other option is to sell. And I'm not really prepared to do that yet. Again, emotional attachment to the house. And so, you know, they're under pressure, you're not. And you have to maintain that willingness to say no 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row, 6 times in a row, 7, 8 before you hit that 1 or 2 that look like this at the beginning. But then something happens in that due diligence period and everything changes. And now you've got $1 million that went out, came back, and delivered an excellent result. Make sense?
To the viewers, don't be scared.
No. Happy lending.
Happy lending.